Hello and welcome to another episode of this Scorsese series. I've been recording a few episodes at this point, and the fact that I haven't actually come up with an official title is maybe a little problematic when I'm trying to do advertisement, but we're just going to keep calling it Scorsese September. Name is in development. I'm recording this August 1st at 4:45 p.m. And joining me today is Mariah Owen, award-winning actor, filmmaker with her Webby honorary production company, GTE Productions. Mariah, I'm really excited to have you on to talk casino. We're talking casino today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a really a fun movie because I always just enjoy when I reach out to a guest and they have a title specifically that they want. Because usually, I'll reach out to a guest, I give them the list, maybe they'll pick like 3 to 5, and then I try to coordinate. Yours was like, if you have casino, give it to me, and I'm like, perfect. So that showed me a passion and excitement to talk casino. So with that all said, though, before we actually get into the film Casino, I just wanted to know a little bit about you, Mariah, because we've known of each other, I'd say, for probably about the past year or two. We've been, at the very least, acquaintances on social media, vaguely aware of each other. We actually just learned that we are at one point lived in the same town together at one point. But yeah, so just tell me a little bit about yourself, Mariah, because again, I don't know much about you either.
Absolutely. So for those listening and watching, hey, I'm Mariah Owen. I'm an actor, writer, producer, director. I founded my production company, which is an award-winning and Webby honorary production company, GTE Productions, when I was 21. And I've been producing with that company for the last 7.5 years. I've had films go to South by Southwest in Cannes, as in Sitges and a bunch of other festivals. And you can find my stuff online on Amazon, Apple, Netflix, CBC, and a bunch of other places. And I want to make movies for the rest of my life. And when I'm not making movies, you can find me usually with my dog. Her name's Mammoth. And what else do you want to know, Ben?
Well, let's see, because I also want to be careful because I know we're in the middle of the strike right now, so I don't know exactly what I can and can't ask you. So, but I did want to start with one project that I know you worked on, which I think was probably the one that at least gave you pretty good notoriety. I want to say it was Poison Ivy from Batman. Is that correct? Do I have that?
Yes, so it's Pamela and Ivy, and it's an origin story for Poison Ivy from DC's Batman. And I'm actually not a member of either WGA or SAG. I stand with everyone striking. I do. And last week I was back in LA and I joined the picket line, and I'm fully in support of that. But for right now, I'm not a member. I'm SAG eligible, so looks like it's coming down that pipeline for me. But yeah, I can talk about a couple projects.
Okay, cool. I always want to make sure because I know, and I forgot to ask that in my pre-production. But when with this, you said it was Pam and Ivy, correct? That's how
Pamela and Ivy.
Pamela and Ivy.
Mhm.
Because I learned about this. I'm a fan of Perry Nemiroff's writing for. I think she's still at Collider right now. But so that's kind of where I remember. Maybe that's actually how we ended up following each other because I followed Perry Nemiroff on social media, so she was sharing that. But so tell me, kind of, what was the origins of, again, not necessarily the first thing you had worked on, but certainly, again, one of the ones that brought you fame.
Right. I mean, I'm not where I want to be yet, but I definitely feel like I've had quite a few shifts in my career thus far. And one of them being, I mean, if we want to use Pamela and Ivy as an example, I co-created that with Leah McKendrick, who is a phenomenal actor, writer, and director. And we met on her first feature, which is called MFA. It premiered at South by Southwest in 2017 and can be found on Amazon and a bunch of other places. And from there, we built our friendship and as, creative collaborators. And then we came together for Pamela and Ivy. And we shot it in 2019 with the hope that it would go to Comic-Con in 2020, but the world was an absolute dumpster fire and Comic-Con was canceled. And we're trying to figure out, okay, well, where can we premiere this? What does the world look like? And we didn't want to sit on it. And Perry really gave us a chance at Collider and, wrote this wonderful article for us. And we premiered and we released through Collider. We uploaded the video itself onto YouTube, but Collider gave us an opportunity to get that film, you know, in front of people who really love Poison Ivy and love the DC world. So I'll forever be grateful to Perry. And I also just really love her writing and her reviews. And that was a big shift. And speaking of Comic-Con, I actually got to speak at Comic-Con was it last week or the weekend before?
2 weekends?
Two
Time
weekends.
flies by now. I think it was 2 weeks ago.
I think so. I mean, I'm whoosh, like time is it's all over the place, you know. I'm like,
Yeah,
is it Tuesday? I don't know.
post Barbie and Oppenheimer, I'm like now lost on like what my
Right?
framing device is for the month. I'm like, oh
Absolutely.
yeah, that like happened like mid to end of July. Post that, it's like, are we in August? We're in August now. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So that was a great kind of full circle moment to finally get to go to Comic-Con. That felt like another shift for me in my career. And you know, Leah's a frequent collaborator of mine. We've come together to I produced her directorial debut, Scrambled, which also premiered at South by Southwest this past March. And you know, trying to navigate everything with the strikes to see where that'll end up. And yeah, I when I think about certain films or projects that kind of launched me or helped me get to where I am, I definitely think about MFA, which was the first feature I ever did. I think about Pamela and Ivy because that, you know, as two independent filmmakers, probably choosing a iconic character that we do not own the intellectual property for was an uphill battle, you know, but I'm really proud of what we made and what we did, and that opened doors for both of us. And then I started, you know, I've been producing for so long. I started as an actor. I wrote when I was at Second City, but I really, you know, with COVID, I had this opportunity. I was like, I'm at home. I want to make something, and I want to see if I can, do, you know, do it all. So I directed, wrote, produced, and starred in my film Disconnected. And that for me was a big shift because that started to open doors for me as a multi-hyphenate creator, not just as a producer, but to kind of, you know, one day I'd love to create and show run my own projects. And yeah, so I think I'm still kind of working on that end game or what the steps are, you know, to getting there. But I definitely think there's been a few projects that have helped.
There was one specific reason that I was excited to have you specifically on the show, which was the idea of when I've been doing this series so far. Like, if you look at some of my past guests slash future guests slash this is all kind of a mess because I'm recording Casino and I haven't even recorded the Goodfellas episode slash even rewatched Goodfellas at this moment, which will be a fun element for when we're talking about Casino. But like, you know, if you look at like the guests who are coming on my show, like they're reviewers, they're guys like me, like they're critics, they're people who have grown up reading, writing, understanding film criticism. And that was one of the reasons I was really excited when you said yes, because I don't really get the chance and opportunity to talk to filmmakers, people who are actively working, you know, on the field, for lack of a better term. And that was one of the reasons that, again, I was excited when you agreed to come on, because I believe the insight that you'll have when talking for Casino is just so much more, you know, just varied than what I can bring to this conversation. So I guess like focusing that question up, because I didn't actually ask you a question, but like focusing that on what was the moment where you knew you wanted to do this for a living? Because this isn't like, you know, I'm a film critic and this isn't always the most stable of jobs.
Yeah, it'll never be stable. That's one thing. That's the only guarantee I think we have in our industry, you know, and I hate to say like we're learning that lesson again right now, but you know, what we do is so special regardless of what area of the industry that you're in, you know, and I always say we're so lucky we get to make movies. We don't save lives, you know. But I think for me, there wasn't necessarily one particular moment that I was like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. You know, I think for me, and I wish I could have that, you know, to articulate that. But I think I grew up in a household that was so, I grew up with a bunch of cinephiles, you know, I watched Goodfellas when I was 7. I was learning movie history and watching old films and dissecting them. And I think when I think about my top 5 kind of favorite movies, you know, Casino is in there. But also, you know, something people might laugh at me for this. but Ron Howard's The Grinch, with Jim Carrey, that I watched that when I was so little. And that was the first time that I saw another world. If you're thinking about when you're little and movies that are kid appropriate, Goodfellas and Casino probably weren't in that, but I watched them anyways. There's so many movies in there, Sunset Boulevard, Casablanca, like all of these different movies that kind of formulated me into being a filmmaker. But I think I knew that I had longevity in this after I did my first feature. There was so much in my first feature that made me feel like I went to film school, because I didn't go to film school. No one in my family's in my industry. So I think after that, I was like, okay, I think I can do this. And I know that I love people and I love working with people. And I was an athlete my whole life. So it's a team, filmmaking is a team sport. So I think I just knew that I wanted to, I just want to make movies for the rest of my life. I want to tell stories. So I think once I figured out in myself that I could do it, that's kind of was a moment. And I've always loved being a goof and making people laugh and feel stuff,
You presented this, I should say, actually, like before we get into this, like idea, I've had this idea / theory that I've been like thinking about with like Scorsese in particular. And it was that like this idea that people who love film growing up, Scorsese is not one of the directors our parents show us. It's typically much harder for us to find it because, Spielberg, George Lucas, Ron Howard, Rob Reiner, like all these guys, like, they're so fundamentally like ingrained with childhood movies that we all kind of just naturally grew up watching. And then Scorsese's like the one, like, R-rated, a little bit perverted, a little bit disgusting, like filmmaker that like, but then you just come in here with the Goodfellas at the age of 7 and you kind of blow up that theory for me. So was that your first introduction to Scorsese, was Goodfellas at the age of 7?
Yes.
Did you watch that with your parents? Is that a traumatizing experience? Like, do you have a good relationship with your parents?
It's so true. Because I think especially people watch the stuff that I make and they're like, are you okay? Like, do you need a hug? And I'm like, no, I had a great childhood. I have a great relationship with my parents. I love my parents. And I think that, it was interesting. I grew up not being allowed to watch The Simpsons, but I could watch Goodfellas. I could watch Jaws. I could watch, and when we're talking about that first wave of, film school filmmakers like the Scorseses, like the Spielbergs, all of those primarily guys, I could watch any of them. And it's so interesting because I think my parents, if there was something that was deemed scary or inappropriate, my parents were always there to talk about it. Or it'd be like, to not get in that situation, you want to do this. Or like, I think I just had parents who I commend my parents on how they communicated with me growing up. I knew about the real world and yet also got a lot of opportunities and support in terms of wanting to play in the world of make believe, and to tell stories and to make things. And I have a lot of different creative outlets. And I think the big joke in my family is one of them is I started watching Goodfellas at 7. And the second is I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons. And then I went to Second City to be a comedy writer where you just straight up study the formula of The Simpsons essentially for comedy. But it's interesting. And to this day, like I think, and I went to University of Toronto and I studied a lot of auteurs and a lot of Scorsese work. Like getting to the opportunity to dissect his work from an academic perspective versus as a filmmaker versus as a fan was really kind of cool and intricate too. So I think I just love him. And I'm so grateful to be here. So thanks for having me come.
So I gotta ask the question then, like, do you remember the advice / talking that you got with your parents post seeing like Casino? Was it like, don't overdose on coke? Like, you gotta like make sure you cut it in lines. Like, what was the advice? Like, do you remember like specifically? And I guess the question more seriously is like, do you remember the first time you watched Casino?
I do. And it's so interesting. I remember, I watched Goodfellas before I watched Casino, and I'll never forget that scene when Henry goes down into the kitchen. It's the long choreographed long shot in Goodfellas when he goes.
Oh yeah, it's set to Layla by Eric Clapton. Like the iconic like.
Iconic. And I remember being at the house I grew up in, like sitting cross-legged in front of the TV, not even on the sofa, watching that, and feeling so like drawn into the world. And I think I really started loving Casino when I was around like 12, 13. And I think I just loved, I mean, I think it's just also like a side of Vegas. It was, it felt like another world to me in so many ways. But the advice my parents, would really give me, be like, you don't want to end up like that. You want to be able to support yourself. You want to communicate for yourself, make good choices. You are who you surround yourself with. Like, can you trust those people? And it was interesting. As I was saying earlier, I rewatched Casino for like the 400th time earlier before this podcast. And every time you can pick up something a little bit different. And there's so much of what, in my opinion, and again, I don't know him personally, but Scorsese, you can, even how he, certain words or certain dialogue or certain perspectives, it's really, really interesting. You can kind of see his viewpoint in a lot of things.
The most fun thing for like me when rewatching Casino, one was I haven't seen this film since I'm gonna say probably 15 or 16. So it's been a good decade for me since I've seen Casino.
Right.
I think I've seen it once or twice in my life. This was always, and again, I've kind of shared this a few times on the podcast. I always had an interesting relationship with Scorsese in the sense that I'm too young to be watching movies when I first watched them, and I don't understand them. Like, it's that experience of watching Taxi Driver when you're 14 and not actually getting how scary the movie is. Like, you watch it and like the shootout of the movie is like probably the most traumatic sequence in the film. And it kind of feels like generic, especially when on the other side of it, I'm also watching Die Hard for the first time. And I'm
Right.
like, this is like way less violent. And it's like, older studying that all like there's an intimidation, all the fear, just the real world consequences of Taxi Driver that really has made that film quite resonant for me. But like with focusing in on Casino again, which I don't like to get off track myself there, but like with Casino, what's so fun about this movie that I remember watching it for the first time when I was like 15 or 16. This is really, and Scorsese has always been this for his career, where he is very much either a minimalist or maximalist filmmaking. Casino in style is so overabundant. Like, this movie has style for days, and it's almost too much style. And in fact, it may even be too much style, but it's just so well crafted in style that it's kind of a shocking movie. And for watching it at 15 and 16, it's really easy to get drawn in with this. I've always heard this movie kind of put in the same boat as like Goodfellas, The Irishman. Like, this is, kind of his mob trilogy, and probably including The Departed. This one is far more in line with like The Departed and like Wolf of Wall Street, and just like scummy people doing scummy things. And it's just ugly to watch at scenes. I always compare, and I had the same feeling when watching Casino again over this weekend, which didn't help that I was sick while watching this movie. But when watching this movie again, by the end of it, you're kind of left a little hungover. And it's the same feeling I have with Wolf of Wall Street, where it's just done and you're like, I was on one when watching this movie. Like, you kind of just get sucked into this energy. And Scorsese's such a good bringer of that energy out.
Absolutely. And I think it's so fascinating. I mean, I don't think there can ever be too much style, and I love everything is so meticulous, and yet it feels real. It doesn't feel forced to me, especially, I've spent a lot of time within Vegas, and I love the history of old Vegas. All of those hotels in that in Casino don't exist anymore. One of them, the Stardust, I actually got to see it implode. So I think it's like a culmination of me loving Scorsese and Vegas and mob movies and just great storytelling. But it's interesting you say that, because it's a 3-hour long movie and you definitely feel hungover or like exhausted at the end, and I think we're getting what I love. And I love that you brought up Wolf of Wall Street, because I think those are two great comparisons of, you're kind of seeing into the nitty gritty of these really kind of insecure people, even Sam Rothstein, like looking for that validation and love from Ginger. You have Nicky wanting the validation from all the made men back home. You're looking at Ginger who wants validation from Lester. it's like kind of it reminds me, I feel like Scorsese in every film that he's ever done, regardless of them being some of the mob movies, or then if we're going back to, like Cape Fear, there, he talks a lot about kind of like the 7 deadly sins in some ways of greed and gluttony and what people, the different sides of humanity and kind of the really ugly parts of it too.
Yeah. So for me, like when I'm looking at Scorsese, and I haven't actually made my official ranking of 1 to 26, what my Scorsese like rankings are. I will tell you, King of Comedy has always been one that I hold near and dear to my heart. That's like, when I'm in college, like that's what I put my thesis paper on, is basically John Hinckley Jr., the aftermath of all that, and then with what becomes the King of Comedy. And what I find so interesting about Casino is you can actually kind of look at them the same way. Like the King of Comedy is largely a response to Taxi Driver and kind of the media sensation that becomes of the Hinckley case and all that, and just the shooting of a president, and his like kind of critique on the media and how people are viewing it, all that, etc.
Yeah.
Casino exists kind of in the same vein, where there is this criticism that comes post Goodfellas, which is, does Goodfellas glamorize this type of lifestyle? And Casino really does just come in here and it's like, no, this is really horrible. Like, this isn't sexy in any way. These people all end up miserable or dead. Like,
Totally.
there's nothing good about this lifestyle. So it's almost, and I wouldn't call Scorsese necessarily a self-conscious filmmaker in the sense that he really feels the backlash, but you can certainly feel his writing influenced by kind of the zeitgeist. He's always been a director who's very aware of what is going on in the cultural zeitgeist, and Casino is largely a response to it. And that's why I was so mad at myself that I didn't get to rewatch Goodfellas before this podcast. Was I just, Goodfellas is another one. I don't think I've seen Goodfellas in a decade easily. Like
And
I know it's like, I had the same thing with it where I was, 14 when I watched the movie and it just didn't connect with me at the time. So I just like, gangster movies as a child were never really my movies growing up. So I just never revisited it. And then, earlier this year, I watched Godfather Part 1 and Part 2. I still have to get through Part 3, but I watched Part 1 and Part 2 like beginning of January when I was at home, I think on vacation. And it was just like, oh my God, these films are incredible. I'm sure Goodfellas probably has the same lasting effect for me when I watch it. But so that was a interesting point for me where I'm just like watching this and I'm just like, I don't know exactly how to read it. I just know how to read it as what Goodfellas is in general. But when watching Casino for the first time, like I said, I remember watching it for my first time. Did you, and sorry, I'm vamping up for this question, but for this was like, Casino is in the shadow of Goodfellas, largely kind of by design. Like, 1990 is Goodfellas, I believe, and 1995 is Casino. Did you ever watch them as either a companion piece, or when you're watching it, do you ever just compare the movies, or how did that like kind of approach come for you? Because watching this movie, it is so hard to detach from Goodfellas.
That's such a great point, and it's something I've never really thought of, because I mean, Goodfellas came out in 90, Casino came out when I was 1, I think, 95. I'm born in 94, and but it's true. Like I do feel like there's some type of intertwined relationship. Like if I were to do a double feature, I would do Goodfellas and Casino. The same way that I would really have to think about, or Casino and Wolf of Wall Street. But those are 2 films that I think I get the biggest hangovers from those. I'm going to steal your words there, like that would be a really heavy double feature for me. But I've never really thought about that. But I think if I had to, I think you're kind of looking at the inner workings of, a mobster story or society and their own hegemonic practices within that. Like, how do they survive within that? What's it like to be an outsider? You look at Goodfellas, Henry's an Irish guy, coming into this world of made men. Sam Rothstein is a Jewish guy, coming into save the casino and be the food and beverage manager in Vegas. So it's really interesting to kind of have this fish out of water, we need you, but you're never going to be one of us mentality that I think they both really play with. Because if you look at, if you look at Goodfellas, no one is really ever home within Goodfellas. Even if you're a made man, there's always a target on your back. And the same happens with Casino. And I think it's really interesting because it's like you are who you surround yourself with, and there's loyalty, but there's always that loyalty can be flipped. If you can't do something for somebody else anymore, that loyalty is elsewhere. And I think it's so interesting because that's such a really icky concept to play with. But I think there's something so interesting to me about like even the lineage within both of those movies, like, the way that their children are so important to them and to move forward. And yeah, it's very interesting, the sense of community that come from both of those films. But it's interesting. I don't really have an answer. I got to let it percolate a little bit longer why Casino is always in the shadow of Goodfellas, because I think they're two super insanely strong and brilliant pieces on their own.
I definitely think the Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci element of the movie doesn't help the comparison, right? Like, because it's just like, obviously, like they are like two of the three stars of Goodfellas, and now they're in this movie together. I do have to just go back to one point you made, and it wasn't actually a point you made. It was one of my friends, I'm Jewish heritage, and one of my friends was like, you have to take this movie a little bit to blast for the casting of Robert De Niro as a Jewish man. It is during the scene where Joe Pesci is kind of berating him and using Jewish slurs against him, I had the feeling of watching the movie where I'm just like, I was like looking around on the screen. I'm like, what Jewish guy is he talking to in this film? I did not understand that Robert De Niro was supposed to be a Jewish man in this movie. He does not.
Oh, you didn't know?
I had no clue he was the Jewish guy. When Joe Pesci is berating him, I thought it was someone else in the scene.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's a weird casting choice for sure. And I think especially now, I mean, Robert De Niro is iconic and everything, but I think it is interesting because I don't know if that same choice would happen today. And if so, what does that look like? But it's almost like a cinematic marriage between Scorsese and De Niro that is, it's magic. Like, I feel like there's very few.
You have to buy it to like some degree, because it's the same thing with The Irishman, where it's just like, okay, Robert De Niro's not an Irishman, but you just go along with it for the movie. I just had to throw that in there because he was going to get mad at me if he's just like, you're going to let like Robert De Niro get away with that. I'm like, yeah, but he's really good in this movie. This is a really tough performance, I think, for him specifically, because Joe Pesci gets to be largely Joe Pesci in this movie, and Sharon Stone gets the big performance of this movie. Robert De Niro is like kind of the definition of the straight man in this movie. Totally. And it's hard to get emotion from him for basically the first 2/3 of this movie. Yeah. And I think it's actually like a really splendid performance that he gives in his career. And it's also one that it's just like, and this is where I talked about the style of the movie. It's so hard to actually like gauge the level of performance just because there's so much going on in this movie, especially with the voiceover work in this movie, which is extensive.
It's true. And I love the voiceover, even on their wedding day, of creepy Lester, Ginger's ex-pimp boyfriend coming in. And that it's anytime that I love how Scorsese can use slower frames to kind of take us almost, I feel like, inside not inside our minds, but our character's mind, and use voiceovers as such a unique element to push a story forward,
Oh, totally. There's such a great, and I keep making this comparison, and I am just I am what I see recently, which is the sense of like, I just have JFK and Oppenheimer on the mind, just because of Oppenheimer recently, where it's just like that style of editing is so fast paced, so relentless. And in this movie, like that is kind of, what you were talking about, being brought into something like that is kind of what brings you into this movie, because I should admit, and I watched the first half of Casino at the Toyota, what's it called? Like this, I was at a small little table at Toyota as my car was getting maintenance. Like I just had it on my iPad. I was sitting there like watching it, and I'm just like, for the first hour of the movie, I'm like, so much has happened, and yet I feel like there's been no story that has unfolded in this movie. And it is like there is story, but I mean, like, it's certainly like you're just like, who is that? Like, where did they go? Like this, it's so fast paced, relentless, and it's like storytelling that it's hard to like get a grip on the movie. Like it is actually hard to steady yourself while watching the movie.
It's true. I think the best way to watch a Scorsese movie is to sit down, turn your phone off, and tune in. And what I love, love, love about Scorsese as a filmmaker, I love the longer choreographed shots. I love the longer takes. I love that things aren't perfect. Looking at Casino, there's the one, the scene where the guy he gets his hand smashed for cheating.
Yeah.
So the guy just after him is in the blue suit. He looks like kind of like a little weasel guy. And, the casino manager comes up from behind him and is like, we got to go back. You can see that there's actually a window bar, within that frame, and the actors are playing back and forth. And I love that. I don't want to call them like dirty shots, but everything is kind of, if I were shooting a film, I'm like, oh, let's shoot that dirty. Like, let's shoot it over the shoulder, and not a perfectly clean frame. Like you and I have clean frames right now, but I love that. Let's say if there was an element like this, an actor might go from this side to this side, like it just feels so real. I feel like when I watch Scorsese movies, specifically Goodfellas and Casino, because those are two of my favorites, even something like a Mean Streets going like way back. Or if we want to go real nerdy, we can talk about his film school short, The Big Shave. I feel like I'm so encapsulated in the world. But just to stay on topic with Casino, thinking about when they're talking about the inner dynamics of the casino, and explaining they're building the world for us. And I think he does a really wonderful job, with his DOP of figuring out, okay, this is the focal point. Like we watch that briefcase, we watch the money go from all these different places, and then we watch it get closed and leave. And then we see, and the voiceovers kind of help us kind of pinpoint these little moments, from an audio perspective. And I think that I don't know, it's an opportunity, even though they're showing us and telling us, there's still so much more that happens in my imagination. I think that it doesn't feel on the nose. And that's such an incredible quality to have in a director and in a writer and a storyteller, to build a world and show people it, but also let them figure things out for themselves.
This is why I really wanted to have you on there, because, you just described filmmaking probably better than years of studying film have ever been able to give me, just because you've done the practical like work of it. One of the things that every time I watch a Scorsese movie, and I've had an interesting relationship where first I discovered him as a film fan, then in college I'm studying him as an academic. Now I'm studying him as a, not necessarily like peer, but someone who's trying to understand his mind a little bit better. Like, I'm film criticism and film, how they go hand in hand at times. Like when watching Casino for this time, like there are just times where you're just like, you feel like you learn so much about just Marty's like lifestyle, or like, family element. Like one big thing I was watching, he did this documentary about where he goes back to Italy to basically, I think it's called Tour of Italy. I don't remember the exact name of this documentary. I apologize. It's a really wonderful documentary where he's exploring Italian cinema that he watched when growing up. And one of the things you learn so much about him is how much of an important thing family is to him, and how that means everything. And then when somebody breaks that family trust, how it's basically unfixable. You will always kind of just have this scar that is broken between you two. And that's like largely what Casino is. It is the story of like what happens when that one blow is dealt that you just can't come back from. And I just love another thing of him that he's so genius at. And I keep every episode, there's just like, I kind of go on like a rant about like how genius he is, but it is like, there are just moments in this film where I'm like, nobody else but Marty could have done this. Like, even like, we're going to spoil this movie, but like the Joe Pesci death scene is still like maybe the most shocking like scene in a movie, just because of the way he's narrating the whole movie along with Robert De Niro. And then it just stops halfway through and he starts screaming because he's getting beaten with by a bat. Like, it's such a trick, and it's such an obvious trick. Like, it's not a hard like effect to pull off. but
Right.
yet it's so genius, and I've never seen anyone else do it to that either degree or success.
Absolutely. I think the way that he uses sound design and he uses music as well, he really knows how to I don't say pull on our heartstrings, but pull on our mind, make things really noticeable to be like, hey, pay attention to this. Like the moment Ginger walks in, that's the only time in the movie there's no sound,
Mm.
non-diegetic or diegetic sound. It's just done, and that's the moment where we see, I think it's such a fascinating moment or a point of storytelling because we feel that emotion that Sam Rothstein feels. That's the moment where like the world stops and things slow down and you fall in love. And that's when he falls in love with Ginger. That was a huge moment for me when him and Joe Pesci get in the car and they're in the garage, they turn the car on because obviously they can't have the feds listening to them and what they say. And Go Your Own Way by Fleetwood Mac comes on, like that's like so representative of their relationship and this push and pull and this friendship and loyalty, and we're family, but we're not, we're screwing each other over, we're trying to stab each other in the back. And just like you said, that end death scene, that it's so perturbing, yet it's so representative and reflective of that society and of that time,
And it's,
of the
yeah.
mafia, of the mob, and it's unnerving. But the audio, I think, helps us in a way, it somehow makes it more digestible,
Mhm.
I would argue. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's this, and it's so interesting because the ending of Casino is essentially like, that's where Casino ends, but Irishman then like is kind of the sequel to Casino, and the fact of like, okay, like Robert De Niro's character has met his like kind of like fall.
Yeah.
What's the next 30 years look like is kind of the idea of the Irishman. Like the third act of the
Yep.
Irishman is like, what if Casino just goes about 30 minutes longer, and how pathetic is this man's like life? Like it's so fun for me when rewatching all these movies is like they're all, to quote, oh god, am I going to be able to pull the quote? It's George Lucas. It all rhymes. Like he's talking about filmmaking. It all rhymes when he's talking about Star Wars, I think.
Uh,
But I'm not positive. That might be misquoting George Lucas, but it is like just the idea of like, and it's everybody, like everybody who is any form creative. We always do come back to like a few of the same ideas. Like we do have a few understandings. Obviously, we can broaden our mind as well, but like there are a few fundamental things that we just always return to and always shapes us and our art.
yeah.
And like that's what Scorsese is so kind of renowned for. It's just the idea of like, I think it would be really easy to just dismiss Scorsese as a genre filmmaker in the sense of like a gangster genre filmmaker. But like there's a reason he keeps returning and he keeps having that itch. Like it's just like he is the classic like Godfather Part 3, where it's like once I thought I was out, but now I'm back in. Like that is kind of Scorsese. Like it's the same reason like his next movie is a movie. Sorry, next movie post Killers of the Flower Moon is a Jesus biopic. Like he just has a few things that he has to return to. And Casino is kind of that fun exploration because it is very much the midpoint of his career. Like I think it is, I want to say it's about 13th or 14th in his like filmography. He's at 26, so it's not like a really like middle of it. And with that, he also just brings alongside actors that have been with him. Robert De Niro being the big one, but like a guy we haven't spent much time on this movie, and we'll get to Sharon Stone. So I don't want to ignore her by any degree. It's just I feel like she's the big performance that we should talk about later. But Joe Pesci is,
Man.
I love Pesci. Like Pesci's one of my favorite actors. There's
Yeah.
this incredible thing where the 90s just taught us that like the scariest motherfucker in the world was just Joe Pesci. Like they just
Honestly, facts.
like Casino does this great scene at the beginning where you're being introduced to Joe Pesci's character and they're describing him as a menace, like all these things, like he's so violent, he can kill anybody, like he's the perfect enforcer. And you're like, oh, it's going to be some big tough guy. And it's just Joe Pesci walking in with an oversized suit on. And you're like, this is the guy. And then he breaks somebody's hands.
Totally. And then you see the way he is with his children. Like it's so interesting. Like I love the duality and in one of the monologues by Sam Rothstein, he's like, oh yeah, I always made sure he was home to make his kid breakfast or whatever.
Mhm.
It's like that sense of family is so woven within all of these stories. And Joe Pesci is just, I mean, he's absolutely iconic. And I think that him in Casino, it's so hard to be like, what's his best work? Because they're all phenomenal, you know?
Mhm.
But I think that in Casino, we just see such like raw humanity at its worst from him.
Mhm.
It's not even, it's like Sam Rothstein, when he's being, not wonderful, it's out of survival, it's out of validation, it's out of unrequited love, it's out of not being respected, giving your all, moving your family across the country, putting up with all the, pardon my language, the bullshit that comes from working with the mob and in these casinos, and then being, asked to leave after you've dedicated your life. Like, you just don't feel like you belong anywhere. And there's that sense of belonging and you'll never be a part of us. But with Nicky, Joe Pesci's character, it's like, where does that come from?
Mhm.
Is it like, if my lowbrow bad answer is like, oh, he has little man syndrome, like short
Mhm.
guys, big guys. But I think it's really more perturbing and dark than that. It's more so a sense to be the boss and to control and to have power and to not have to face consequences of your behavior.
Yeah, and
That's peak.
there's certainly like even like that was also another thing that I found very fascinating when rewatching Casino, after especially rewatching the documentary that I mentioned about Scorsese going to Italy. Like, there was this kind of thing where like Scorsese is an East Coast director. Like, New York is so like,
Worker.
yeah, woven into his filmography. Like, what interested him in Vegas, and then like you realize like what interests him in Vegas is the same idea that Vegas is essentially what New York is to some degree, where it's just like this hodgepodge of communities kind of moving in together all at the same time, to some degree, even vying for power. And that's what Casino largely is. Like, Casino is the story of essentially a bunch of immigrants moving into some place, and that landscape being changed, influenced, and in some ways destroyed, and in other ways like rebuilt, like all in it through obviously crime. Like, that is
Yeah.
what it is exploring. Like, it's the same ideas that's in all of his other quote unquote gangster movies. Like, those are the fundamental ideas, and that's why Casino is so like, he sees New York in that. It's just like, that's a very universal story.
It's so interesting. I've never thought about it that way, but it's true. Cause in my head, I'm like, oh, well, he's such a lover of history and, whether it's cinematic history, he's heavily involved in the preservation of true film and film negatives and everything and the protection of them. But then I think also, like, when I think about Vegas, I think about Vegas was started and founded by the mob.
Mm.
Vegas wouldn't be what it is today without the mob, which originated back in New York and everyone coming over, to the West Coast. And it's fascinating. And I think that for me, that's always been my perspective is he, kind of going back to that mob true crime route, and exploring that community there. But I think it's true. Like, you're right. It's these immigrants who are coming and building something from nothing, quite literally in the middle of the desert, relying on their communities and relying on themselves in this very like survivalist, it's not, I don't want to say like it, but it's a dog eat dog world,
It
and I
is,
think
yeah.
it's like they really pick and choose their battles, and it's fun to watch, but I also think it's kind of like um an allegory or a cautionary tale of how to get something done.
It
Be careful.
definitely is. Like, one of my favorite like elements of like rewatching this movie is, and this is again the fact of like seeing this movie when I'm 15, 16 versus seeing this movie now when I'm 20, 25, 25. That's how old I am. Let's confirm that in my head real quick. 25 is like, I hadn't been to Vegas, right? 15 or 16. And then, I've been to Vegas a few times, more times than I probably should have, in the past few years. And like, there is a culture to Vegas that is so hard to capture in film, And I always describe it like this because, like, you can see movies like Ocean's 11, like, you can see movies set in Vegas. And
Yep.
I'll tell you, like, I always tell people who haven't been to Vegas, like, oh, is that the vibe? Like, you're all in really nice suits. And the answer is like, yes, you start off in like really nice suits, like, you think your night's going to go well. And then by like 3 a.m., you're sweating in the desert heat because it's like 111 degrees. It's disgusting there. You get home on the flight. The flight is the worst thing imaginable in your life. And then, like, you get home and you just feel like you need to shower for like half an hour. Like, you just can't like wipe off the stink, the cigars, the alcohol of Vegas. And yet, and then it's the scene where in Casino where they fly over and we see Vegas, and it's only the part that is lit and the rest of the desert just is empty. Like, it's
Oh,
just an incredible, incredible cinematography there in that movie. Like, there's an allure to it. Like, there is this like kind of thing where it's like, yeah, but I kind of can't wait to go back. Like, I kind of need my fix eventually.
absolutely. And it's so interesting to me because I grew up going to Vegas a lot. And my parents weren't big drinkers or gamblers, and neither of my family. But my mom, she's a gymnastics coach and works a lot with Cirque du Soleil. I had family that had a place out in Boulder, which is near Lake Mead, which I'm sure, being a fan of Scorsese and following all of this, now they're starting to have a lot of, this is gross, but bodies in barrels floating up to the surface.
Yeah.
Which makes me very nervous because that's the water that I, grew up in and swimming in. And but I didn't know Dirty Vegas until I turned 21. Like, sure, like I saw stuff on the streets or like the creepy guys with cards, like any girl direct to you in 20 minutes, like all the creepy parts of Vegas that I was like, ew, like when I turned 21, I'm not doing this. And then obviously I've been to Vegas quite a few times and had a lot of fun, but it's interesting because the history within Vegas is so fascinating to me. And I've been to the Mob Museum, which is there, and just kind of seeing how that city has like gentrified and grown and failed and grown again. And, I like I'll never forget watching the Stardust get imploded,
Mm.
and that was such an iconic hotel. And that was a moment for me where they did the countdown on the hotel, and then you saw it, and we heard something, and then you watch the building crumble, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere the smoke just
Yeah.
gotta get out of there.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think for me, Vegas has always been this kind of like interesting, magical place in the way that like there's so much history, and I love big, bright things. And it's true, that allure of being out in the middle of nowhere and then seeing all of these crazy lights, and then, the backdrop of all the mountains looking, that beautiful red, burgundy, brown, yellow, like against a blue sky. It's just everywhere you look looks like a postcard.
That's the thing. Like, I would encourage anyone who they're ever going to go to Vegas, do the drive to Vegas from like California to like getting into Vegas, because I've done the drive. And it is literally like one of the most surreal moments when you are in like, we drove in at like 2 or 3 a.m. because we were driving post work. And like driving into Vegas, it is like quite literally pitch black.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's lights. It's just kind of excitement. Like, there's an energy that just kind of picks up. And I'm not a heavy drinker or anything like this. Like, Vegas always brings out the worst of you in that sense. Like, it's so alluring. Like, like
And it's so hot. Like in
it's
the
so
summer.
hot, and like they're handing you drinks and it just becomes a mistake like after a few hours. Like, there's certainly like, and it's so fascinating too when you're in Vegas. Like, there's this nature of being there, and you also still kind of feel the mob mentality of the town. Like,
Yeah.
there are just certain like with the security, like you can kind of just feel that mob influence in the style of the decor of all of it. Like, you really still feel like this. What's fun about this movie is Casino, against being watching this movie post going to Vegas a few times, is the movie doesn't feel dated because Vegas kind of looks the same. Like,
Right.
every casino has a general look to it. And that's the fun thing about Vegas in movies, is it's just like, it never really feels like Vegas. It obviously ages, but it's certainly like when you're in the casino, and it's again the allure of Vegas. Like, you don't know what time of day it is.
Totally.
Like, it's
True.
you to some degree, you might not even really feel like the years. Like everything feels like a bubble when you're in Vegas. Like all the world issues, politics, anything, like you just don't
Forgotten.
feel it when you're in the casino. It's kind of just like, you're trapped in there.
It's so interesting because it's you are like trapped, but it's also
Literally.
complete escapism. People go to Vegas. It's like that whole mentality of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Like it's like the chamber of secrets for people's worst behaviors and
Mm.
some. But then I think too, like it's so interesting because I was thinking when you were saying like the casinos kind of blend in together because on the exterior they're all so different.
Mm.
That's what makes them so cool. But it's true, you go in and if some of them are all interconnected, right? So all the interior parts of the casino, like the true casinos, they're all the same. But then what's different are all the things that make you allure people to go there. Whether it's I'm thinking of Planet Hollywood, and they have the Miracle Mile within there, and that's like, and then that's by Paris, and then going to or Paris, and then you go to New York, and that's different. You go to the Luxor, that's so different, but all the casinos truly are. I never really thought about that. The only ones that I would say are kind of feel different to me are like the Wynn or Encore, in the way that they're so ornate with their ceilings, and their the way that their architecture has been created and designed. But I look at the Venetian. I haven't spent too much time there, but walking through, it's just that kind of everything's so ornate. But you're right in the way that once you get to the actual casino, it's all the same.
Yeah, and that's what Scorsese also really captures in Casino is this element of not only like the variety of like, it's a maximalist filmmaker's kind of dream to be in Vegas. Like there's so much to look at in every frame, and every frame is so beautiful and bright.
Yeah.
And just you can do so much with color, lighting in that movie, cinematography, like you get to do so much of style. And then he also just captures this thing where it's he captures the confusing element of Vegas where it's so beautiful juxtaposed with ugliness within the casino. Like,
Right.
In Casino, the actual movie, like we see like some deplorable acts going on the floor of it.
Absolutely.
And that's like very true of whenever you go to Vegas. Like, and I won't say these stories offline, but like, we see politicians like in this movie. Like we see like supposedly like famous people kind of just doing debaucherous behavior out in the public. And it's like, people are walking through. You ever go to any of those, like the Wynn is a great example. If you ever go to the Wynn, you're going to run into someone like either of influence, a celebrity, and you'll always run into them. And it's like the worst look for that person. And yet it never comes out because it's just kind of accepted. That's the culture there. Like it's such a weird juxtaposition to be there.
And it's so true. And just the one point I'm thinking of, we see so many acts on the floor. And what I love is that, in the film specifically, you look at towards the midpoint to the end of the movie, Sam Rothstein has that epic office that looks down onto the floor, and he has eyes on everything, and he can go to the security room, and everybody at one point, specifically Ginger or Nikki, has shown exactly who they are multiple times, and it's like, who do we choose to look away from when they mean something to us, and I think that's a really cool thing he plays with as well within his films.
And he gives that line where he gives the line, I think it's in The Office, where he's talking like, I have eyes on this person has eyes on this person, this person has eyes on, thing goes all the way to him, and then he's like, and the person who has eyes on me is the beholder, or something along those lines, like creator.
Or even when they're all skimming money, he's like, funny how no one has an eye on, who's skimming who, he's like, funny no one's ever looking in that direction or whatever,
And like, yeah, no, sorry, sorry for cutting you off, but like, I think we kind of actually got to the natural point of this episode, which is probably the big performance out of this movie that we've spent no time talking about. And I really want to make sure we hit on this as our time's slowly running out. But like Ginger, Sharon Stone in this movie is a very powerhouse performance in this movie. It's a very in energy with this movie. Like I said, where De Niro's being a little bit more subtle, that the reason De Niro is subtle, so it allows Sharon Stone to go so big in a lot of these scenes. Like this is such a loud performance from Sharon Stone.
I absolutely love it. And it's so fascinating to me. I wrote about this a lot in school when I was looking at Scorsese work. Women typically in his films are using sex as currency. you know, as a way to survive, as a way, not just saying like, oh, by prostitutes, but it's power, it's an exchange, it's, you know, it's love in some ways, it's security, it's safety, but it also tends to be their downfall, you know. And I know that we've referenced Wolf of Wall Street a few times, but if I look at, you know, Margot Robbie in Wolf of Wall Street, and I look at Sharon Stone in Casino, there's a lot of parallels there, you know, of seeing those, our strong male leads, seeing those characters, wanting it almost like a possession, and wanting to kind of almost trap it and make it fit, you know, loving this big, beautiful thing, and trying to make this, you know, epic square fit into a circle and into a life that isn't fitting, you know, or not what they signed up for. And obviously Margot Robbie's character didn't succumb to the same issues as Sharon Stone's, but it's interesting that these, you know, each one of these girls didn't get what they signed up for. And yet in the beginning, they used their appearance as a currency to move up in their life, you know, and I found it to be so interesting, you know. And Sharon Stone in this is, the arc to me is hands down one of the best performances in acting history. And I say that, you know, I know that's a heavy hitter thing to say, but I think it's true. I know she was nominated for Academy Award for this performance. And like, I think that, you know, she doesn't necessarily get the credit she deserves for it, is truly how I feel, you know. And it's so representative of the culture and of a character who's so deeply wounded, you know, and we learn so much about her because of all the backstory and her awful kryptonite, you know, relationship with Lester. You know, it's so heartbreaking. Like, you have all of these broken souls essentially being in Vegas looking for love and validation and respect and to be idolized, you know, and Ginger, all she ever does is take care of people in the beginning, and yet she needs to be taken care of the most.
It's a really powerhouse performance from Stone. Also, you kind of see like where she's reflecting on her career at that point, because obviously like she's been in big movies at this point, like Basic Instinct. It's like 92 or 93. Like, it's certainly a few years before this. What was that?
It's so good. Her
Yeah,
performance in Basic Instinct. Oh.
Yeah, like there's certainly like this element where like, you know, Scorsese is such a good director of actors where it's just like, and that's not to take anything away from the performance of Basic Instinct, but like, she is supposed to be the bombshell in that movie. Like, she is supposed to be the sex symbol of all sex symbols. And like,
Yeah.
you know, Verhoeven, like some of the stories that we've now kind of learned about that production and what Sharon Stone has said about what that, like some of those scenes were filmed off versus what Paul Verhoeven like has said, like it's certainly complicated that legacy, but it also was something that kind of followed Sharon Stone to a degree, where it's just like, what is she if not a sex symbol? I think was kind of the question to some people during that period of run. And Scorsese is like, this is an extremely talented actress, and this is like what she can do, and like it's always the fun thing. And that's, again, not to dismiss any of the other performances that Sharon Stone has obviously done that were incredible. And it is that just, you know, misogynistic thinking with Sharon Stone specifically, especially post Basic Instinct. But it is like Scorsese, and it's one of my favorite things about him as a director. He knows how to utilize the actor to their full, where it's just like, what makes you an interesting movie star? Like, he is so fascinated with what a movie star is. And because it's very clearly defined, there's movie stars in his movies, and then there's a lot of character actors in his movies that complement the movie stars, and in some cases like steal the movie in some cases. But it is really a concerned thing of like, what can Sharon Stone do as an actress with just everything, with her eyes, to the way she walks, to just even the way like she pronunciates words, like the way her voice can even crack when she's yelling at Robert De Niro. It's just like, that's a specific choice that only Sharon Stone can do. And that's such a level performance from Sharon Stone in that case, because then she has to also, you know, like, she's hitting all those marks. Like, she is going toe to toe with two people who are often considered the best of the best. Like, and she's kind of outlapping them, like in every scene of this movie. And it's not even a kind of, like, she is literally stealing Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci's screen presence whenever she's on screen. Like, she is the performance in this movie.
Right. I totally agree with you. And it's so refreshing to hear someone say that as well, because I think that, you know, it so often in we see it a lot in cinema, but you know, women are used as a kind of a mechanism to move a story forward. But for her, she is the inspiration for Sam to kind of, you know, get everything back on track, and then to also be the downfall of so much of everything that he wanted. And then you looking at Nicky and just him being an absolute pig within this movie. You know, loyalty means absolutely nothing to him unless it benefits him, you know. um I love the way that she uses kind of like, I would say, the lowest form of affection, you know, with that being kind of like a lowest level, or maybe not affection, maybe intimacy, to be her currency, you know, to get that quick high. Like she, you know, she's always addicted. She's addicted to the attention. She's addicted to the high. She's addicted to the yes, is what I would say, you know, of getting what she wants, and of that instant gratification that comes from, you know, being someone who was a hustler and took care of people and got to go everywhere and dress beautifully, and then was Sam's wife, and then also, you know, just kind of like this beloved person even when she was messed up.
Yeah.
Um, and then she
She
kind of falls to the wayside at the end.
she kind of gets, interestingly enough, and it is, so maybe it's because these movies are, so thematically similar. She kind of gets the Marco Corleone arc in Godfather Part 2 in this movie. Like she really does get the rags to like, this is
Richard.
what I achieved, but at what cost? De Niro certainly has some of those moments where he's more the Diane Keaton character, just like trying to like almost get her to reason, and she's just like not giving him anything. It's not a perfect comparison by any means, but you certainly, what I'm trying to compare that is to the sense that she gets the arc in this movie. Like De
Totally.
Niro obviously doesn't really change by the end of this movie. She's going from the rags to riches to obviously the downfall eventually. Like it's a really layered performance from her. And it's like, I think you used one of the best like ever. I would definitely go as far as to say, I don't know if I can necessarily get on that claim. I'd have to think about that one. But she's certainly like one of the best performances, not De Niro, Scorsese has ever gone out of an actor, period.
I think so. And it's just so free. Like nothing within her performance ever feels forced. You know, like I think, you know, when I see Robert De Niro, and we've seen him so many times, and Joe Pesci in these, you know, mafia mobster kind of roles, we just totally believe it. You know,
Mm.
and at the time I hadn't seen Basic Instinct. I saw Basic Instinct for the first time this year. You know, so for me, seeing Sharon Stone in that role, I just 100% believed her. I had nothing to compare to, but I was never once taken out of the world. You know, when you're watching certain things and you're watching and you're in it, and then you're like, oh, I gotta look away. Like, oh, so I'm distracted. I never once got distracted, which is rare for me, because thinking about even our generation, you know, anyone under the age of 35 probably has a very short attention span. We don't have a lot of movies in our lifetime that are over 2 hours. You
Mm.
know, this, I think the runtime on Casinos is
259,
58, or yeah, exactly. So it's like just shy of three
right
hours.
under it, just to like get the less than 3 hour mark, but like there.
Exactly. You
Like,
know,
and this is kind of like my last point before we start wrapping up this conversation, but like the I just recently watched Gangs of New York, and like this is, Cameron Diaz's performance in Gangs of New York is one that I personally find like just a disaster. Like just I like Cameron Diaz, but like I just don't think she's like suited for that part at all. What I find so fun about then Sharon Stone is, and I was rereading some of the highlights of the press tour for this movie, and it really was kind of the question of this was like, was this stunt casting to put Sharon Stone in this movie? And like, that's like kind of what this movie is like to a degree about, where it's just like, no, like she is of equals to them and outperforms them. And it's, it's such a provocative performance from her. Like she is the movie. This movie does not fundamentally work because either Joe Pesci overpowers the movie in a bad way, or Robert De Niro is too subtle for the movie in a bad way. She is kind of the central. She brings out the elements that makes the Pesci performance so well, with the subtlety that makes the De Niro performance so good.
Totally. It's
She's the
like a
perfect
perfect
middle ground.
trifecta. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
And then before we actually like kind of end this conversation and move into like the last part of it, do you have any like final thoughts on Casino?
I just love it. I hope everyone watches it and watches it and really dissects the movie, and really to think, oh wow, what does that even mean? And from a filmmaking perspective, I think about I think the thing that stands out for me now more when I watch it, it's a certain element. It's like, where do my eyes go? How does the music transport me to another time or give me, and so much what I love about Casino is the duality in their conversations. We
Mm,
see it in some of the subtitles, in some of the scenes when they're speaking in code because the feds are on them. But even the way music really comes into play, I love that, it's just beautifully crafted to tell a story and shine a light on an area of people that, I think has been kind of glamorized or glorified in the way that, mobsters back in Vegas, such a grandiose time. And
yeah.
I think, just shows the dark underbelly of a really seemingly beautiful world. And I love everything from, the obviously the storytelling, the visuals of the cinematography, but then I love the style of the fashion and the production design and the value and I'm so fascinated when filmmakers build a world that I feel like I'm a part of. And I think that's something that Casino's always given me. It's a piece of history that feels like it's in a little time capsule, and it's also based on a true story. I think that's something I also love, it's just I I don't know. It's a movie for me that will always feel timeless. I think there's also things for me as a producer. I love that Barbara DeFino, continued on to produce many Scorsese films after they were divorced. She's a female producer that I don't think really gets a lot of credit, producing for some of the biggest movies of our generation and of our many generations at this point. So I think for me, it's just a really big feat and thinking of, would that be made today? And if
Yeah,
so, what
no.
would that look like?
I think that's a great way to kind of summarize this. So I guess before we end this, I have three questions for every guest that I have. The
Yeah.
three questions are, let's start with the Chu, actor who is passed away, who you think would be great, and actor who is still alive, who you think would be great in a Scorsese movie.
Actor who passed away, I'll have to say Humphrey Bogart, because
Mm,
I love my old movies and I would have loved to have seen that collaboration, and even like a Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart and Martin Scorsese, like, oh, that'd be so cool, because I think, you know, Scorsese just has a really great way of writing female characters that come in like a hurricane, kind of blow up the world of our main character and, end up being their demise in some form. But Humphrey Bogart just has that strong, silent, kind of similar to a Sam Rothstein character type, archetypal wise. Would have just loved to see what the emotions that Scorsese could have pulled from him, that isn't
that's
reflective of media at that time.
I picked that answer a few weeks ago as well, or a few episodes ago too. So I think that's a great answer.
Awesome. And then a living actor, I'd love to see Viola Davis. I think that there is,
Yeah.
like, I would love for Martin Scorsese to write a film or direct a film with a strong female lead in a position, like, to really play with those gender dynamics and really throw it on his head, because so much, we look at women in Scorsese movies, typically our lead females are, beautifully flawed, and that usually leads to their demise, as I said before. But looking at all the other women who are players, loved how he always had his mom in his movies.
Mm.
But looking at even Nicky's wife, she helped him get through the best and worst of times, hiding diamonds in her hair, that just unwavering loyalty, above all else, I think would be a really unique perspective to play from, because I think so many of the women in the mob mentality and the communities there really play a part in the success of those communities.
And she's just incredible in any movie that she is in. So with that all said, I got to wrap up this episode, but I don't want to take you away. I got to get the top five before you leave.
Okay, so Casino, obviously,
Yeah.
Goodfellas, Wolf of Wall Street, Taxi Driver, and I'm gonna say The Big Shave, because I watched that Big Shave, and that was when I watched it for the first time in film school, before I'd ever made my first feature and started getting the horror thriller space. And I think it's not perfect, nothing
Yeah.
is perfect, and I love that. Even as beautiful and as grand and marvelous as Scorsese movies can be, I love that they always feel real. They feel real to me.
That is a great answer. And I will fully say you are the first person to have the big shave in their top 5. So I salute you for that. Mariah, where can the people find you?
You can find me online at Mariah Owen, MariahHowen, on all platforms, or head over to www.mariahowen.com. And yeah, I hope you all go back and watch Casino right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me in today's episode. All the links that she just said will be in the description below. We'll be back tomorrow with, I'm trying to think, what is the next movie in Scorsese's filmography? I believe it's Kundun. So we will be back with Kundun tomorrow with film critic Drew McWeeny will be joining us. So that will be extremely exciting. So Mariah, thank you for joining me today. My name is Ben Friedman here from the Benverse Movie Channel. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and bye-bye.